Which tiny nation, with no natural resources and a land size smaller than a major city, is quietly becoming the blueprint for how the world should be run? Welcome back. Today, we are talking about a country that has done what most thought was impossible. Singapore, a city-state with fewer than 6 million people, sitting at the tip of the Malay Peninsula, has built one of the most efficient, prosperous and forward-thinking societies on the planet. It ranks among the top in the world for education, healthcare, financial stability and quality of life. Its port is one of the busiest in the world. Its airport, Changi, has been voted the best in the world more times than any other. Its legal system is clean, its streets are safe, and its government is globally respected for execution and vision. But here is the bigger question. Is Singapore just a success story of the past few decades? Or is it actually pointing toward the future of global leadership? More and more nations around the world are looking at Singapore not just with admiration, but as a model to follow. Today, we are counting down the top 10 countries that see Singapore as a future global leader. Let us get into it.
Number 1. United States of America. The United States may be the world's largest economy, but American think tanks, universities and policy circles have studied Singapore for decades. Washington has long admired Singapore's approach to urban planning, clean governance and strategic trade policy. American business schools use Singapore as a case study in economic management. Silicon Valley investors pour money into Singapore because they trust its legal framework and financial infrastructure. The US views Singapore as a reliable, neutral partner in the Indo-Pacific, and many American officials openly acknowledge that Singapore's model of meritocracy and rule of law is something democracies need to seriously examine. With rising concerns about political gridlock and institutional inefficiency back home, more American voices are pointing to Singapore as proof that good governance delivers real results. The two nations share a deep defense relationship, and the United States repeatedly identifies Singapore as a cornerstone of stability in Southeast Asia. For America, Singapore is not just an ally, it is increasingly a reference point for what effective governance can look like in the modern world.
Number 2. China. China's relationship with Singapore is one of the most fascinating in modern geopolitics. The late Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping famously visited Singapore in 1978 and came away so impressed that he told his officials to study and surpass the Singapore model. That visit helped shape China's own economic reform strategy. Decades later, Chinese officials and students still visit Singapore in large numbers to study its public housing system, economic zones, and civil service structure. China sees Singapore as proof that an Asian nation, rooted in Confucian values and pragmatic governance, can achieve world-class standards without adopting a Western political model. Singapore's majority Chinese population and deep cultural ties to China make it a unique bridge between East and West. Although geopolitical tensions
Number 3. India. India and Singapore share one of the most robust bilateral relationships in Asia. With a large Indian diaspora in Singapore and deep economic ties, India looks at Singapore with both pride and ambition. Indian policymakers have often referenced Singapore's transformation from a developing port city into a global financial hub as inspiration for India's own aspirations. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has visited Singapore multiple times, and India has modelled several of its smart city initiatives on Singapore's urban planning approach. Singapore is one of the largest foreign investors in India, and the two countries have linked their digital payment systems in a move that signals deep financial cooperation. Indian students flock to Singapore's universities. Indian entrepreneurs choose Singapore as their regional headquarters. For India, Singapore represents what disciplined governance, strategic location, and investment in human capital can produce. As India rises on the world stage, it increasingly frames its own ambitions through the lens of what Singapore has already achieved. The respect is mutual, deep, and growing stronger every year.
Number 4. United Arab Emirates. The United Arab Emirates, and Dubai in particular, has openly modelled much of its ambition on Singapore. From free trade zones to world-class airports, from attracting global talent to building financial hubs, the UAE has studied the Singapore playbook closely and applied it aggressively. Senior Emirati officials have cited Singapore as their primary benchmark for economic diversification. The UAE wants to be Asia's Singapore, or more precisely, the Middle East's version of what Singapore represents. Both nations share a similar challenge: small in size, resource-dependent, surrounded by larger and sometimes unstable neighbours, yet determined to punch far above their weight through strategic positioning. The UAE sees Singapore as living proof that a small nation with vision and execution can become indispensable to the global economy. Abu Dhabi's sovereign wealth strategy, Dubai's logistics ambitions, and the UAE's drive to attract top global companies all carry the fingerprints of Singapore-style thinking. For the UAE, Singapore is not just admired from afar, it is actively being studied, replicated, and built upon.
Number 5. South Korea. South Korea is one of Asia's great economic miracles, but even Seoul looks towards Singapore with genuine respect. Korean policymakers and business leaders see Singapore as a model for staying competitive in a rapidly changing global economy. South Korea admires Singapore's ability to attract multinational headquarters, build a frictionless business environment, and maintain geopolitical neutrality while staying deeply integrated into global supply chains. Korean tech companies use Singapore as their regional base in Southeast Asia. Korean researchers study Singapore's education system, which consistently ranks among the top in the world. Korea's own push to become a financial hub in Northeast Asia draws heavily on lessons from Singapore's success as a financial centre. There is also a shared understanding between the two nations of what it means to exist in a region dominated by larger.
Number 6. Japan. Japan and Singapore have long maintained a relationship built on mutual respect and shared values around discipline, precision, and long-term thinking. Japanese companies have operated in Singapore for decades, and Japan sees the city-state as the most reliable gateway into Southeast Asia. But beyond trade, Japan increasingly looks at Singapore as a model for navigating the pressures of a changing world order. As Japan grapples with an aging population, economic stagnation, and the challenge of attracting global talent, Singapore's immigration and talent attraction policies offer a compelling contrast. Japan's government has cited Singapore's pension system, known as the Central Provident Fund, as a model worth examining. Japanese urban planners study Singapore's approach to high-density, high-quality living. Tokyo's ambition to become a more open financial centre draws inspiration directly from Singapore's financial hub model. For Japan, a country that reveres mastery and execution, Singapore represents something rare, a nation that not only set ambitious goals, but actually delivered on them consistently over more than 5 decades. That kind of track record commands deep admiration in Japanese policy circles. Number 7. Australia. Australia sits at the intersection of the Western world and the Asia-Pacific,
and in that position, Singapore looms very large. Canberra sees Singapore as the anchor of stability in Southeast Asia and as a country that has mastered the art of balancing relationships with both the United States and China without losing its independence. Australia admires Singapore's ability to stay neutral, influential, and trusted by all sides in an increasingly polarized world. Australian universities have formal partnerships with Singapore's top institutions. Australian businesses use Singapore as their Asian headquarters. Australian defence and intelligence communities work closely with Singapore on regional security. But more broadly, Australia's policymakers and strategists see Singapore as a model for how a mid-sized, trade-dependent nation can punch above its weight through smart foreign policy and economic positioning. As Australia navigates its own complex relationships with China and the United States, Singapore's diplomatic playbook is studied with growing interest. For Australia, Singapore is a guide, a partner, and a reminder that geography plus good governance equals genuine global influence.
Number 8. Switzerland. Switzerland and Singapore are often mentioned in the same breath, and for good reason. Both are small, wealthy, politically neutral, and deeply integrated into the global financial system. Both punch far above their weight in diplomacy and international commerce. Switzerland sees Singapore as its closest parallel in the Asia-Pacific, and increasingly as a rising rival in the competition for global financial flows and international headquarters. Swiss banks have a strong presence in Singapore. Swiss pharmaceutical companies use Singapore as their Asian manufacturing and research hub. Switzerland and Singapore have long cooperated on financial regulation and anti-money laundering standards. But there is also a sense in Bern that Singapore is accelerating in ways that Switzerland is not. Singapore's younger demographic, faster technology adoption, and aggressive push into digital finance and fintech have Swiss policymakers watching closely. Switzerland recognizes in Singapore a kindred spirit, a nation that has made neutrality, quality, and reliability its core brand. And in a world hungry for trustworthy, stable, well-governed nations, both countries understand that Singapore's star is rising.
Number 9. Indonesia. Indonesia shares a border with Singapore and has one of the most layered, complex, and important relationships with it. As the largest economy in Southeast Asia and home to nearly 300 million people, Indonesia could easily overshadow its tiny neighbour. But Jakarta looks at Singapore with a mix of rivalry, admiration, and genuine respect. Indonesia sends more of its wealthy citizens to park their assets in Singapore than almost any other country. Indonesian students attend Singapore's universities in large numbers. Indonesians travel to Singapore for advanced medical treatment. And Indonesian policymakers, particularly around the Riau Islands and new capital Nusantara, have explicitly cited Singapore as an urban and economic development model. President Joko Widodo's administration drew on Singapore's Jurong industrial town concept when planning industrial corridors. There is an understanding in Jakarta that Singapore's success is not accidental. It is the product of deliberate institution building, rigorous planning, and relentless focus on competitiveness. Indonesia, as it rises, increasingly sees Singapore not as a rival to defeat, but as a standard to aspire to, proving that a neighbour's success can be the greatest source of national ambition.
Number 10. United Kingdom. The United Kingdom has a unique and emotionally complex relationship with Singapore. Singapore was once a British colony, and the fall of Singapore to Japanese forces in 1942 was described by Winston Churchill as the worst disaster in British military history. But what came after is one of the most remarkable turnaround stories in human history, from colonial outpost to global powerhouse in less than a lifetime. Today, post-Brexit Britain looks at Singapore with something close to aspiration. British politicians have repeatedly invoked the vision of a Singapore on Thames,
imagining a future United Kingdom that combines financial deregulation, global trade openness, and strategic neutrality in the manner of Singapore. London and Singapore are among the world's top financial centres, and their law firms, banks, and trading houses are deeply interconnected. British universities have partnerships with Singapore's institutions. UK defence forces operate with Singapore's military regularly. For Britain, rediscovering its global identity after leaving the European Union, Singapore offers a compelling model: small, sovereign, globally connected, and fiercely competitive. The student has, in many ways, become the teacher.
And there you have it. 10 countries, from the world's largest economies to its most strategic powers, all looking at a city-state of fewer than 6 million people as a blueprint for the future of global leadership. What makes Singapore so remarkable is not just what it has built, it is how it has built it. Through meritocracy over politics, through long-term vision over short-term popularity, through trust earned on the world stage rather than borrowed through size or military might. In a world increasingly defined by chaos, division, and institutional failure, Singapore stands as quiet proof that good governance is not just a theory, it is a practice. And nations that practice it well do not just survive, they lead. Singapore's story is still being written, and the next chapter may be its most important yet. If you found this video valuable, please hit the like button, share it with someone who loves learning about the world, and subscribe so you never miss what we put out next. We will see you in the next one.